And I serve as the African American Political Director for the Democratic National Committee. We are so excited that you are joining us for this very important conversation. We're going to allow just a minute or so for people to join. We're going to get started sharply at 6:02. Again, we want to thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for joining us. And for those who have joined, I'm going to, in the chat box, I'm going to drop a link to our Seat at the Table video. If you're not familiar with the Seat at the Table initiative, it was started in 2017 by the now senior advisor, Wakenya Clanton, who understood that it was important to engage Black women in the upcoming election cycle within the Democratic Party, but also ensuring that we had a seat at the table, that our voices were being heard, and that we were being engaged. So if you're joining for the first time, if you're not familiar with the Seat at the Table program, please take a moment to look at the chat box so you can learn a little bit more about our initiative here at the Democratic National Committee. And again, for those who are just joining, my name is Ebony Baylor, and I serve as the African American Political Director for the Democratic National Committee. We are so excited that you have joined us for this very important discussion on voter education, vote by mail, and voter expansion during this 2020 election cycle. As we know, COVID-19 has changed the way that we are looking at voting, and we wanted to ensure that all people, including our community and Black women who are the backbone of the Democratic Party, are engaged and involved as we are looking to educate our community, because in order for us to win in November, we're going to have to do it collectively. For those of you who are unfamiliar about the Seat at the Table initiative, it is a joint initiative by our DNC Black Caucus and Women's Caucus that was started in 2017 by our now senior advisor, Wakenya Clanton. I am going to drop a video where you can watch. It's no more than 2 minutes, where you can learn more about the program, about Sit at the Table, and all the great work that's been done over the last few years. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start the discussion. And I'm going to introduce two amazing women who advocate, who work, who organize hard on behalf of the Democratic National Committee. We would not be able to do the work in such a way that would be as impactful without our DNC Black Caucus Chair, Ms. Virgie Rollins, and our DNC Women's Caucus Chair, Ms. Lottie Shackelford. I am going to turn over the floor. You're going to hear first from Ms. Virgie Rollins, and after Ms. Virgie, you will then hear from Ms. Lottie, and I will come back and introduce Ms. Wakenya Clanton, the Senior Advisor to the Chair for the Democratic National Committee. Ms. Virgie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ebony. Thank you, Wakenya. I'm so excited about this series, this Black Women in Politics speaker series. You know, this is probably one of the most crucial issues in this election time for voting by mail. And so we're going to be working hard with you, because we know those Republicans are going to be putting fear-mongering and misinformation and trying to suppress the vote. So I'm excited about our speaker and our special guest today, Secretary Wade. I'm looking forward to hearing from her. And thank you again, Wakenya, and your ambassadors. And I'm so glad to be on here with our Women's Caucus Chair, Lottie Shackelford. Lottie?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Well, good afternoon, or I guess it's almost evening time where you all are. Again, I too want to echo Virgie's words and I'm so grateful and appreciative of young folk taking the reins and moving ahead and just pushing us forward. Wakenya and Ebony, when I tell you, you all are doing magnificent work day in and day out. And I know this is probably the third or fourth session you've done this week, with many more still to come. And as Sheriff Virgie Rawlings said, who was a very dear friend of mine, and we chat over and over again, trying to figure out ways that we can make certain that our community particularly has the tools it needs. So Secretary Way, we are just so thrilled and excited that you're going to be giving us some tools, because we all know Black women truly are the backbone of this Democratic Party. And if we're going to be successful in November, by no stretch of imagination, it's going to be Black women who will carry us across the threshold. So with that, we need all of the equipment we can get. We need all the information we can get. So Secretary Way, we're looking forward to you sharing. We realize every state has a different set of rules, a different set of regulations, but you know what? Black women will be able to figure them all out. So again, thank you so much. And thank again, Wakinya and Ebony and Virgie for all of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lottie and Ms. Virgie, for those comments. And again, thank you so much for allowing us to do this work. And me and Wakenya, we are always excited to work on behalf of the DNC Black Caucus and Women's Caucus, because we understand that we work for you and we work with you, and it's our pleasure to serve you. Before I introduce our senior advisor, I want to go over a few logistical things. So if you can see, there is a chat box. We are going to be taking a few questions and answers during this discussion. So if you have a question, please utilize your chat box. Please do not use the Q&A function. Please utilize the chat box. And in the chat box, please put your name, the state you're from, and your question and who it is for. We're going to work very diligently to get all of your questions answered, but realistically, we won't be able to answer every question. But what we will do is we'll make sure in the follow-up email that all questions are answered. So again, if you have a question, utilize the chat box, put your name, the state you're from, and your question, who is for. Now, at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wakinya Clancy, who serves as the senior advisor to the chair for the Democratic National Committee. The Sit at the Table initiative is something that she created when she came on board to make sure that Black women have a seat at the table and that our voices are being heard, and that we have an avenue and a tool to organize the Democratic Party through the backbone of the party, which are Black women. So the next voice you will hear, and for the remainder of the time, will be Wakinya Clanton. Thank you so much, and you all have a blessed evening.
Thank you so much, Ebony. And thank you, Ms. Virgie and Ms. Lottie. Those are my sheroes. I have the pleasure of continuously to serve them at the DNC. They are magnificent women. They have been my mentor, my friend, my disciplinarian. They've been everything that I needed in my previous role and in my current role. And so I greatly appreciate them for that. I won't hold you long. Most of you all are familiar with Seat at the Table. Most of you all, this is your second time joining us for this Black Women Speaker Series. And so I could not be more thrilled for tonight's topic. So we're going to be talking about vote by mail. Yesterday, Ebony did a great job of pulling folks together to address the issues of voter suppression and really do a deep dive discussion on that with some members of Congress. Tonight, we are following up that town hall with some practical training and some advice from some experts in the space. Many people may not know this, but there are Black female secretaries of state in this country, and we are so happy to be joined by one tonight. Her name is Secretary Tahesha Way of the state of New Jersey. Secretary Way, thank you so much for joining us. I believe that for some folks on this call, including our voter protection director, you would find joy in knowing that she is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. I'll let her have that. She's a Black woman and we support all Black women. And we love the work that she's doing in New Jersey. She not only oversees the voting process in New Jersey, but she also is responsible for the census and making sure that all the folks of New Jersey are counted, and making sure that the proper resources reaches the communities that need them the most. But a really fun fact, she's also over their tourism bureau. So she does a lot of work. Her work can fluctuate depending on what day it is and what time of day it is. And so we're so happy to have her join us on today's call. Secretary White?
How are you?
Hi, how are you?
How are you, Wakenya? Again, thank you for having me, you and the DNC, and of course, all of the lovely ladies that are on board and who are watching. And I'm hoping everyone is staying safe and well.
Me too. Let me tell you, I know I am. You see this head wrap? This head wrap is here because I refuse to put myself in danger to go get my hair done. But as soon as the gates open back up, I'm at Shanae for hair without any question.
I'm right along with you.
Listen, Secretary Wade, I mean, first of all, thank you for everything you've been doing, not only for the state of New Jersey, but the models that you're setting for the rest of the country. I think as we approach this election season in particular, amidst the pandemic, and when we have so much energy around this voting process, it's so great to know that there are folks like you who are serving in these positions. I believe that we're going to talk about how we effectively safeguard our democracy, given in times like this. We have to hear from folks who are doing it every single day. So I appreciate you for taking time to join us here today. Now, I know I gave a little fun things about Secretary Wade, but I want the folks on the call here to get a chance to know a little bit about who you are. You know, I think oftentimes when people think about secretaries of state, folks that look like you and I don't often come to mind. And so that was one of the intentions behind tonight's event, but also to give you space to to delve a little bit deeper into who you are and how you got your start in this field.
Well, again, thank you for hosting this important session, Wakenya, because of course, for me, I see this as being really the ultimate year of our democracy. I say this because we have, as you mentioned, the U.S. Census, and I hope everyone is completing their census form. We also have, and every election is important, but we have a presidential election. And thirdly, I have my pin, the New Jersey Votes, Women's Vote. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment when women gained the right to vote. So an important year in our democracy. So a little bit about me, just want to keep you guys awake and keep this moving. I am New Jersey Secretary of State, but I am a proud transplant from the Bronx. I come from parents who worked in both public transit, and they made certain, my older brother and myself understood that it never should be about the me, but should always be about the we. And a lot of times I'm oftentimes asked, where in your point of life did you figure out what you wanted to do? So I just mentioned it because when I was 19, rising junior in college, I had suffered a life-threatening cerebral brain hemorrhage. And I think that that was a moment in time for me, which made me grateful for my life and for those who work in public health, who dedicate their lives to service of others. So with this being said, I was not one who was so good and astute in medicine and science. So I knew that was not going to be my path. But what I did feel was that law might be a great way for me to ultimately serve others and make their lives whole. So I went on, I attended UVA Law School. I met my husband there, graduated, we moved to New Jersey. A quick fun fact about him is he played for the New York Football Giants. And then we started our family. I worked at a general practice law firm, and that's too is where I got involved in community engagement activities and also local politics. I eventually became a county freeholder, which is the term used in New Jersey for county commissioners. And subsequent to this, I was appointed a state administrative law judge, which I felt was a perfect marriage with my two loves of the law and government. Given as an administrative law judge, you preside over contested cases involving governmental entities. Then 2 years ago, 2018, I was appointed by Governor Murphy, and it's an honor to serve in his administration. He's extraordinary. I must also say that It is a privilege to be part of a true diverse cabinet, one which is predominantly female. That too is, you know, a highlight and a joy. And for me, it's also a true honor that I am the only, and I take this truly to heart, that I am the only Black Secretary of State in the United States who serves as a top election official. So wrapping this up, I do want to also mention of equal importance is that I'm a mom, a proud mom of 4 daughters, 2 of whom are voters, 1 of whom will soon be. And then we have a 5-year-old. She has a bit way to go, but she runs our house and she runs it well, keeps everything organized. But having daughters, you truly become keen and conscious to making certain that you be that that strong role model for not only my girls, but all the girls who look just like us. So thank you.
That's amazing. And, you know, I personally love Governor Murphy. I think he is an amazing governor. Sometimes he makes me wish I lived in New Jersey, but not really, because I kind of love Maryland. So.
You can come.
You know?
Come on. Come on.
No, I really appreciate. I mean, he sets a really great example of what inclusion looks like, or should look like in this country, and so I'm really proud of him. I know one of my first on the ground assignments was in New Jersey during his election cycle. I actually came down with the chairman, and we brought together 200 Black women in a room. So that was amazing. Nice. With Reverend Green there in New Jersey. So that was one of my first victories. Shout out to Murphy and Oliver team. I love y'all.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned that like you are one of the only Black women in the country who serves as a state's top election official, right? I think I got that right.
Correct.
And that's a huge responsibility. I don't want to like not address the fact how huge, or not acknowledge the fact about how huge of an opportunity and responsibility that is. With such a huge responsibility, can you talk about how you are performing the functions of your office in a time such as this, and what methods or procedures are you considering as you look at what the road to November looks like for voters, for New Jersey voters in general?
Okay, and that's a very important question. And of course, with the pandemic upon us, our people's health is of paramount importance, but at the same time, we have to keep democracy moving forward and having the access so everyone who is eligible can vote. For us, first and foremost, in New Jersey, we are a state that allows voting by mail for any voter without an excuse. So if you want to vote by mail, all you have to do is apply. And even on that application form in New Jersey, voters now have an option to sign up for vote by mail for all future elections. And I have to say, thousands of New Jersey voters have chosen this option. Now, specifically in terms of this pandemic, what have we done? First, the state acted to postpone several early spring local and school board elections, and we rescheduled them to occur just this past May 12th. And to keep voters, poll workers, and election staff safe, we made the decision to make the May 12th elections exclusively conducted vote by mail, where every voter impacted received a ballot and a postage paid return envelope. So you have your postage, you just return it. Now, in terms of the primary, the state has rescheduled our June primary to July the 7th. And this way we could give our state, county, and local election officials more time to prepare for the primary. That it's not going to be conducted as per the usual course. This primary, we're encouraging vote by mail. It is primarily vote by mail, but still, there are going to be polling places open. I'll get to that in a few. So so that everyone knows what New Jersey is doing. Every registered Democrat and Republican in New Jersey will receive a vote by mail ballot, again with prepaid returned envelope. Every unaffiliated voter, however, will receive a vote by mail ballot application, allowing that voter to choose whether to register for a party and receive that party's vote by mail ballot for the primary. Voters can, yes, that's the distinction, because again, we have a primary. So if you're registered D or R, you get the ballot. But if you're unaffiliated, you get your application and then you can select. But there's both will still receive the prepaid return envelope. So again, there's no excuse of I can't find the stamp or anything like that. We want to make sure that our voters, make it as easy as possible during this pandemic. And voters can return their ballots in the mail, or they can place them directly in one of 5. We're going to have 5 secure ballot drop boxes located throughout their respective counties. So I live in Passaic County. There will be 5 different locations to do that. In addition to all of this, to accommodate those who might need assistance, such as our disabled voters, we never want to forget that population, or even those who feel strongly that they want to vote in person. Every municipality in New Jersey will still have at least one polling place open in accordance with the appropriate public health guidance on social distancing and face coverings.
That's amazing. That's like the perfect model. I don't know if you secretaries of state, like all of you all swap information, but I feel like you should like release your plan as a toolkit for other states, because what you've done in New Jersey is really make voting easy and accessible to folks. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face in this country. So I appreciate you for even having the foresight to come up with the type of plan that puts that type of practice into place. Now, I know we're running a little bit close to time, and I want to honor other commitments. I feel like we just got started.
I'm sorry, guys, ladies.
I'm so sorry, but this one. I think this is going to be a good one to kind of like round out the conversation a little bit. And I apologize to all the folks. We had a lot of questions coming in; they were firing in. But for the folks who are on the phone who are interested in organizing their communities and who are joining us tonight for not only this conversation, but also for the training that's going to follow, what advice can you give to us to help organize and re-engage our families, our friends, and communities around voting during this time? Like in the event that something happens and we're not able to go to the polls like we have been accustomed to in the past on election day, how can we work now to help people better understand or rethink the culture that exists around voting?
Well, I have to first say and preface this, Joaquina, as an appointed official, you serve in a nonpartisan fashion. So I can't specifically advise campaigns how they should do their jobs. However, what I do know is my team's focus is on making certain voters are first aware of voting's importance, similar to what we have been doing with what I consider the fraternal twin to election, the census, and our outreach and groundwork, if you want to say, throughout the state. We have to educate. We have to re-educate how to register to vote, okay? And in this time, we need folk to understand, because each state has different laws, but we have to really fully engage and help voters understand how things are being changed up when it's time to cast a ballot. Now, specifically, my team and I, we are huddling up from a distance, of course, socially distancing, and we're ensuring we're doing our part. We're intending to move forward with a primary election voter education and engagement program with an emphasis on youth participation. We want to help voters become more aware of the deadlines of vote by mail, reminding voters, when you get your vote by mail, please read the instructions fully, understand, and don't forget to sign properly your ballots upon return. And we want to make sure that this entire process of voting, moving it forward, voter engagement and the like, is going to be sustainable, not just for this pandemic, but for years moving forward. And that is why, and I say to my team all the time, we really have to focus upon the role of civics. Folk need to know and understand how their communities govern. I mentioned at the top of this program, I served as a freeholder. I go into schools. I even speak to adults. They don't even know what a freeholder is. And I even say to myself, don't you pay property taxes? So why are you not understanding that layer and level of government? And I really feel that if we're more aware and engaged on the civics front, this then will increase the probability of folk truly rushing to the polls and voting and turning it out. And during this pandemic, we have to shift gears. Of course, we're not one-on-one contact anymore. So we have to make certain to have like a robust plan to tap into our social media platforms and our local partnerships.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I know we are at time, but I want to ask you this last one. How can our viewers stay connected with you and the work that you're doing in New Jersey?
Loving it. And it's very simple. All they have to do is follow me at Secretary Way on Twitter and, of course, on Facebook.
That is perfect. Thank you so much, Secretary Way. Thank you for taking time this evening. Thank you to your Chief of Staff, Jay, for making sure that we got this locked in. I appreciate you all so much. And please continue your work in the fight. We will be right back and bringing you all a new panel of dynamic Black women experts in the field of voter protection. That's coming up right next. Thank you, Secretary Way, so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Wakina and team. And look, you guys stay blessed and stay well, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right, take care now.
All right, bye-bye. Amazing, amazing. I hope you all, we see the chat. The chat is lively. We appreciate you and all of your support from all of you all who are viewing today's training. Next up, we're going to bring to you the DNC Voter Protection Director, as well as the Policy Director for the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, Ms. Hazine Ashby. These two women are going to talk to you really briefly a little bit about the work that they do and have done as it relates to civic engagement and voter protection. And I think Hazine is here. Yep, there she is. Hi, Raina. Hey, Hazine.
Hey, Wakina.
Hi, ladies.
Hi.
How are you all doing? Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Secretary Wade was amazing.
Yes, right? She was great.
She was great. I mean, I love the way that she put the plan. And she just pretty much told every other Secretary of State in the country how to run an accessible voting program for your state. So I loved it. Well, I don't want to belabor it because I think we have a lot of exciting information that we want to get into tonight. I think the folks who have joined us want to hear a little bit about not only the work of voter protection, but also some of your experiences as folks who have either volunteered or worked directly hands-on in various states, particularly battlegrounds and swing states, around the acts of voter protection. I think as we prepare our minds to engage in this election cycle, there are some things that we really need to be cognizant of as we go into this process. And so without further ado, I want you each to kind of share with our viewers tonight exactly what the job of voter protection is, and also what that means for a voter protection volunteer, someone who's looking to get engaged, cares very passionately about protecting the vote, and what are the avenues in which they can engage. So Raina, I'll go to you first. I'll let you take the first stab at that, and then we'll go over to Hazine. She's done some additional work before her time at the DSCC at the Urban League around this very same issue, and then she's done some volunteering in Florida. So I'll get her to give her the volunteer perspective, and you can give us the director's perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Wakenya, for your vision and putting Seat at the Table together. I'm so happy to be here this evening and really happy to talk about voter protection because I eat, live, sleep, breathe all of this. So thank you.
That's your jam.
It is my jam. So as a voter protection director, my goal is to ensure that every eligible voter can cast a ballot and have that ballot counted. That last part is very, very important because many of us know what voter suppression looks like. You've seen it on TV, you might have experienced it yourself. And so our job is really to do all that we can to make sure that every person who's eligible to vote can have those ballots counted, and employing whatever strategies are in place to make that happen. I previously was a regional voter protection director in Ohio for the Clinton campaign. And in 2018, I ran the statewide program for North Carolina with their nonprofits. And the logistics of a program are very similar regardless of where and how you're doing this program. It is getting volunteers to be your eyes and ears on the ground and addressing issues that are barriers to voting as they come up. Working with election officials, working with elected officials, essentially anything that impacts voting, monitoring it and addressing it. And the volunteer aspect is key. To give an example, in North Carolina in 2018, on the nonprofit side, we had almost 800 volunteers across the state. In Ohio in 2016, in Cleveland alone, Cuyahoga County alone, we had almost 750 volunteers. So these are usually massive programs that rely on everyone where they are coming up to the plate and calling out problems when they see them so that we can address them and fix them.
That's amazing. And I think that's important. I think to like level set for folks who are always looking for stuff to do, particularly in times like this, even now, folks may not know this, but the DNC runs a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365 days a year voter protection hotline because we know the practice of voting deserves to be protected around the clock. And for folks who are on the ground, who have their ears in different pots, it's important to make sure that we are aware as things are changing, as things are being discussed, so that we can be proactive in our approach to that. So, Rena, I thank you for that. That actually came in under your administration. So kudos to you for that, and also having the foresight to share that with other state parties as well. Now, Hazine, you have done voter protection work on in both the nonprofit world as well as the volunteer and what is always a hotbed state, no matter what the election is, Florida. Okay. And can you share with the folks on this call a little bit of your experience as a volunteer on a campaign? Just for folks who are listening, you should know that both of these women are credentialed lawyers. They are barred, and we should make sure that folks know that they practice voter protection, but they are also practicing attorneys. Judicial attorneys. So I will turn it back over to you, Hazine. I think it's important for folks to know like some of the experiences that a volunteer can kind of have when they're integrating with the campaign.
So thanks, Wakenya. Thank you for having me. So I think I would start by telling people, if you've never worked with the campaign, understand that the moment that you get there, you're a full-time staffer. Especially if somebody thinks that you're competent, you are in. So for me, as you said, when I was at the Urban League for almost 5 years, I did a lot of our civic engagement stuff. From my 2012, 2014, and then 2016, I did a lot of going out to different states. Like I was in Florida working with our urban leagues. I was in Virginia working with our urban leagues. I think Ebony, who some people might have seen, we were together at the Urban League. She did some stuff in Ohio. We had stuff in Pennsylvania. Like we continue to hit all of the big kind of battle states where we had a lot of folks and it was all about educating. We found that for us, especially, I'm going to talk about Black people specifically. For Black people specifically, the data shows that if you touch a Black person one time even, and you talk to them about their right to vote and their voting and just voting period, you have a better chance of turning them out to vote. That is even if you're just calling them on the phone, going in their house, like just educating them about their rights and what they're going to do, what they need to do, you increase that chance of that person showing up. So when I got to Florida now, people knew that I already had done that. So I got to Florida and I was like, I'm just going to go in and I want to do some door knocking. And then on the day of, I will go in and I'll man a hotline so that I can answer questions for folks. I got there a couple weeks early, so I'll give you guys, I'll share a lot, but also know I was completely in my personal capacity. Ended up taking about a month and a half off from work at the Senate. At the time I worked for Senator Bill Nelson. He was running in Florida. I am a Florida resident also, so I took that time off because you have to do it personally. You can't work in the Senate and then go like on Senate time and work and do campaign work. When I got there, they were like, well, so I ended up in Broward. Everybody knows. I'm sure you guys understand.
If you're going to win Florida, you got to go through Broward County. There's no way around it.
So I have family in Broward. I got to Broward, and it was like 2.5 weeks before the election, and nothing was really situated. We had our volunteers, and like Raina said, every county had hundreds of volunteers. My area was Broward, Collier, and Lee. So it went down from South Florida to across the state to the west side to Collier County, where I'm actually from, and then Lee County. It turned out that they didn't have a program really set up the folks that were setting it up didn't have it set up in Collier and Broward. So I ended up completely setting up the program in Collier County and in Lee County. That meant getting hold of all of the volunteers, letting them know the days that are coming. I think we had something like 400 and something volunteers for shifts that were all day. This was for early voting and then actually on election day. You slot people in. We had to do training to teach people what they needed to do, train them on Florida law so that they understood what Florida law was. And then also man phones so that when people had calls or people sent in things to the hotline over email to the hotline, we were answering and letting people know, no, you should be able to vote, use a provisional ballot. If you do this, you need to do that. Yes, if your signature was denied and they said that your signature didn't match, this is what you need to do to fix it so that you can cure it. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you end up doing, but I will say that it was probably one of the best experiences that I've ever had. And I've done this work for a long, long time. I think that I always end up working on campaigns. I always end up doing get out the vote and voter protection stuff. But I will say Florida was a whole different animal because it really, sitting in a room for 2 different counties and then also being privy to what was happening in Broward at the time, you really just start to see the nefarious ways in which people's ability to vote are being taken away.
And speaking of that nefarious nature, what are some of, and I think it's good to share because not everyone has experience or they don't recognize voter suppression or voter oppression or intimidation when they see it. What are some examples of things that you've experienced in places like Florida and in places like Ohio or North Carolina that our viewers should be really paying close attention to, particularly as we get closer to voting in this climate and we don't really know what to expect? What are some of the traditional things that folks should kind of keep their eye out for? But then what are some of the other things that may pose as an issue as we get closer to this election day? We've had some questions come in around, for people who have drop boxes, are the drop boxes locked? Like, what are some of the things that they should be like, have a keen eye for as they get ready to engage in the practice of voting?
So I would say that one of the misconceptions about voter suppression is that everything is like what you saw in Georgia in 2018, and it's going to be covered on the news, and it's going to get a lot of coverage. When I think of voter suppression, I essentially think of it as anything that limits or is a barrier to a person voting. And that happens on an individual level, okay? So voter suppression might look different for a different person. Like, so for example, if I have a disability and I need curbside voting, if the curbside voting is not set up properly, that's a barrier to voting. And so I really want people to understand that voter suppression and can look very different depending on who you are and where you are. things, there are so many stories that I could tell of some of the things that I've seen and some of the things that we've worked to fix. But you know, a couple of examples that have come up in recent months have been polling locations located inside of gated communities. It could be that you go in to vote and the person who is checking you in makes an inappropriate comment about your name. We had a situation in North Carolina in 2018 where one of the poll workers said to someone who was of Middle Eastern descent, they didn't know that, but they were like, you know, I like to play a little game with people when they come in to try and guess where they're from. That's inappropriate, right? Exactly. The look on your face, like, you know, that person thought that they were being funny or cute or whatever. But when you're going in to vote, it doesn't matter where I'm from or what my name means. What your job is to check me in and to make sure.
Am I on your roll?
Exactly.
Did I get my ballot or no?
Exactly. And so, like, it could be a variety of things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I agree with Raina, because I think it's everybody kind of expects that. I think sometimes people think maybe we're going to go back to like the old time poll taxes. Somebody's going to tell me how many bubbles are in the piece of soap. It's not. It's sometimes really innocuous things. I got in 2018, we had so many calls from people being told that they couldn't wear, like in Florida, it was like an Andrew Gillum shirt inside to vote. That is not a law. Like that is not real. Like you can go in to vote. But then people are telling folks that they can't do that. And then they're sending people away. And especially when you're working in communities where people are hourly employees and they came during their lunch break and they came really quickly to vote, that you did not, like, they don't have time to go back and forth. They won't go back and forth. People will just give up. Or in Florida, during early voting, you can vote at any precinct in your county, any precinct at all. On election day, you can only vote in your precinct. And a lot of people didn't know this. So we were getting calls like 15 minutes before the polls closed where people already had stood in line. And that's another thing, long lines. Long lines deter people from staying. And people would know that. Like, and I'm like, but you knew that you had like 2,000 voters here in your precinct. Why do you only have one machine? Or why do you have two machines, but one is down and you never called anybody to get it fixed? So now people are waiting in line. Right. Yeah, people are waiting in line forever. And then 15 minutes before they get inside and someone's like, oh no, you can't vote here. You need to go across town to go vote. And folks are like, well, I'm not going to get in. I won't be able to get in line before. Like, I mean, we had several calls. I remember this one woman was crying. And I felt like, and it made me sad. Like there was nothing we could do for her because she couldn't get across town in rush hour traffic, basically, so that she could get to where she needed to vote. She wasn't going to be able to vote and she wasn't able to. Or being a poll watcher and getting outside and knowing that you put a precinct in the middle of a Haitian community. And there were absolutely no Creole translators there. So when I would show people like, oh my God, can you please help me? And I'm like, I don't speak Creole, but hold on, I can help you get somebody. So it's like, I think there's so many little things that like, it seems like it's not a big deal. And then you realize that all these things cost people time. And if voting is going to be a timely activity, a lot of folks just don't have the privilege of being able to put all that time in.
So I think that was a good point that you just brought up there, Hazine, because I think sometimes when we start thinking about ways that we can volunteer and people feel like because they don't have a specific skill set, right? Like they're not a lawyer or they're not, a political whatever, that they can't, there's no space for them to volunteer. But when you start talking about dual language, right, and people who can speak and interpret and understand other languages in places like Florida in particular, when it's like 12 different countries in one place, you need people of various backgrounds who can help translate that process, particularly with, we had all the Puerto Ricans who were displaced, you have a big Cuban community, you have a big Haitian community, it goes on and on and on in places like Florida and others. And so I think as our viewers hone in on ways in which we can volunteer and be a part of this process and act a part of this process. We want folks to consider all of the things. And so I know, Raina, you and Andrea are going to get a little bit deeper into some of the other things that they can do as we get into the training. But I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that before if in an event folks have to go, they need to know that there's always something that each one of us can do to be a part of preserving and protecting our vote. And speaking of which, Raina, I'm going to give this last one to you. What is the one number that people should know when it comes to protecting their vote?
The one number?
Yes, as in phone number.
Yes, 833 DEM vote. Okay, 833 DEM vote. We run a year-round voter assistance hotline, and the reason we do that is to make sure that people can have their questions answered. It's really, really important. And it feels good, honestly, when someone calls up and you know that they've not just gotten information, but they've gotten correct information.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of disinformation out there. And I want to put in a plug, because I think you said that was the last question. So let me just also put in a plug too. I've been doing voter protection for a long time. I started as a volunteer, sort of worked my way up. I am tired of people talking about me and not talking to me, okay? Voter protection tends to be old white men in terms of the people who are volunteering, in terms of the people who are running these programs. And we need Black women to be involved. We need Black women who know and understand communities to be the people volunteering in those communities. And it depends on the state, it depends on the county, like there are different requirements, but I think there are two ways that you can do that. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that as Andrea and I go through the presentation. But volunteering and being a poll worker, like in many states, you can be a poll worker at the age of like 18, and in some states you can be a poll worker at the age of 17. Having people who care about voter suppression, who care about making sure people have access to the ballot box, actually helping to administer that election goes a long way. You know, I'm not gonna have a conversation with Wakinya if I'm, you know, the person checking her in, talking about, oh, like, what's the nature of your name, and like causing a scene, right? Like the thing that happened in North Carolina with that particular person, like, you know, I'm going to be a little more sensitive and thoughtful about that. That is just one example, though. And that's not to say that everybody who doesn't look like us is not a good poll worker or volunteer. I'm just saying that we need more of us doing this work, because there are not as many of us out there doing it. Like, and we need us to step up to the plate, especially when it comes to voting rights and voter protection.
And Raina, I misspoke. Actually, that was the last question for me. There are some other questions here from some of our attendees that we actually have time to get to. So I want to make sure that we actually do that. Kathy Sykes, I think that's State Representative Kathy Sykes from Mississippi, has a question for you. She wants to know, what happens if someone sends in a ballot, but then decides that they want to go vote in person later? How is that handled?
So it depends on the state. Like, so let me just make very clear too, part of the reason why voter suppression is so prevalent is because every state has different laws. But in most states, even if you request your ballot, and you change your mind, like you can either return it in person or you can go vote in person. I would just suggest that specifically for Mississippi, because I don't remember the laws off the top of my head, let's sync and we can connect and we can give you the best answer. But just know that in many places there is the option, even if you have requested a ballot, to either just go in person or turn it in person.
Yeah. So in Mississippi, we have excuse. So we have to have an excuse for why we need to absentee vote. And if we turn that in, that's it. You know, like you can't go and you can't send it in, you know, to the clerk and then go vote.
Oh, no, I'm not saying send it in. I'm saying if you have requested your ballot, but you haven't voted that ballot.
Oh, if you haven't voted. Yeah.
Yes.
I think her question didn't necessarily address that. Hers was about what if you wanted to vote, go back and vote later, do you get it back? No, I don't think so.
No.
Once you got that ballot, you cast it. It's the same way if you would have went to the machine and cast your vote in person. You don't
exactly.
I need to change this ballot. Once you cast it, once you put it in the box, that's it.
That's it. That's it.
Okay, let's see. We have other questions. Oh, y'all are fired up about this. Okay, here we go. So in the age of COVID, and this question comes from Lynn Gray out of Michigan. I believe she's from Michigan. She's in the age of COVID, where we are using technology to educate and engage and ultimately turn out the vote. What is the best way to continuously do that in our communities leading up to primaries in general elections after COVID? So how can we do that even after COVID? So if this is if basically what she's saying is, if where we are now, if we're thinking about how to use technology to mobilize voters in this environment now, how can we continuously build on that in terms of engaging voters in the future? And making sure that we're not just worried about a general election, but we're also doing the same thing in primaries or off-season elections for folks.
So I would say,
go ahead, Hazine. Yeah.
From the data that we saw before, when I said earlier, if you had just outreach to voters, and once you touch voters, so there are lots of different programs that measure just a voter touch. So you can do it by just calling a person. You can do it by, I think calls are really effective, but also you can do it by texting. You can do it by email. But I think that having a call bank is the best way, because folks have found out that if you talk to a voter one time, a Black voter one time, you have increased their chances of going out to vote. But I think it was like 65%. I don't know if you remember the right stat, Marina, but it was really high. If you talk to them like twice, then you started seeing like 80% that they were going to go. And when you call people and you reach out to them, if you do like a call bank, your group will be able to see whether or not that person ended up going to vote. And then you'll be able to tally to see how, and you can see how your interaction with that person really went, and if it helped them. And at that time, it really gives you a chance to answer questions that people have. And especially in the age of COVID, you can do it at home. And you can do it literally do it from anywhere, because you can download your call list and just do your calls from even your cell phone.
That's very good advice.
Yeah, I was going to say you hit the nail on the head with that. And I think the only other piece I would add is that, I think it's also up to all of us to keep our elected officials accountable, so that they're not only reaching out during an election year. We need to have education and engagement all year, regardless of whether they're up for re-election or not.
Amazing. And this actually will probably be our last question, because we want to go ahead and get into the training. So many of the questions that are coming into us are actually things that are going to be addressed in the voter protection training, and how you best work around that. We also sent out for you all who RSVP, prior to 15 minutes before the event, you should have gotten an email that has some resources in it. And those resources include our state-by-state safeguarding our democracy document with vote by mail. You should have gotten talking points that you can use with your community around vote by mail, as well as some myth debunkers around vote by mail that you can have in your repertoire. If that's your toolkit, feel free to use it, digest it, and use that to educate other people on what they need to know about vote by mail. We have a question here from Jennifer Bloomer from DC, who's also one of our seat at the table ambassadors. Hi, Jennifer. The question came in, she says, how can we get our seniors open to engaging online, but also get them to adapt to the model of voting by mail? Now, we know in our community, our relationship, particularly Black people's relationship with voting, is very, very nuanced. And so it's very personal to us. It is not just ceremonial, but we can verify. We verified that we did it, and it made it into the box. And so how can we, in a time of COVID-19, reassure our voters that their ballots are going to be counted given this time, and that they should, if they are so inclined to, really consider vote by mail as an option for engaging in this electoral process?
So we're going to cover some of that in the training in terms of, sort of, the whole making sure your ballot is counted. What I will say about the first part of that question as it relates to seniors, one thing that I want to stress is that despite being in COVID and having to make adjustments, a pandemic should not disenfranchise voters. There needs to be options, and vote by mail is one of them, but we are not at all saying that vote by mail needs to be the only option. We need options that allow people to vote safely, and for some, that will mean that they are going to be able to vote in person. For some, it's going to mean vote by mail. And so I just want to throw that part out first to say that, like, vote by mail is a good option, and it's a safe and secure option, but it needs to be an option of amongst others. And some of it is going to come down to education, and that's not just for those who are seniors. Really driving in, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to do this workshop this evening, really diving in and focusing on the education piece is going to be critical if we want a lot of people to vote by mail, because you're right, it is a culture, and for some, voting by mail is not that culture, and sometimes it takes time to get to that point. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we're not shy about saying that, but we need to do it because we don't know what November is going to look like in terms of COVID, and we want people to be prepared.
So thank you, ladies, so much. You have given us a breadth and wealth of knowledge, and we truly appreciate that. For those of you who are viewing us, don't go anywhere. We have about a 60-minute vote by mail training, organizer training coming up. Through that training, you're not going to only learn about the process of vote by mail and myths that you need to be prepared to debunk, but how to actually effectively organize your communities to participate in this process. So we believe in actions in the Democratic Party. We believe on delivering results for people, and that's what we're seeking to do today. Raina and Hazine, tell the folks who are watching us right now how they can stay connected to you after this is over. I'm sure there are going to be tons of many more questions that are going to come out. You probably want them sliding your DM on Twitter, but just making sure that you share with them the best way to stay connected to you and the work that you're doing around this very critically important issue.
You can reach me at Ashby, that's ASHBY, at dscc.org. We actually have another voter protection woman specifically, and I'm happy. And she and I actually work together. She's my deputy on our policy team. So I can help you connect with her. I know that we're doing a lot of different GOTV efforts and voter protection efforts in all of the states that are up right now, and especially our hot states. So if you know that you're in any of those, like, just name a few off the top of my head: Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Maine, Montana, Colorado, let us know. I'm sure that we'll be happy to put you to work. Then on Instagram, I would not really reach out to me on Instagram. I do not take a lot of pictures. I have 4, but I'm DC_Hayes. And then on Facebook, I'm just my normal name, Hazine Ashby. I think on Twitter, I'm also DC_Hayes.
And I put our voter protection email in the chat box, vopro@dnc.org. We do have a network of voter protection directors around the country. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through our training. So definitely you can reach out to us on that. And actually, we should drop in, we'll drop in our volunteer sign-up form as well into the chat box so that you can fill that out and we can get you where you need to be.
Amazing. Thank you, ladies, and thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hazine. Raina, you hang right here with us, and we're going to bring on Andrea. Give her just a second or two to get set up so that we can share our screens here and get folks trained on how to do the work that we need to do as it relates to voter protection. Andrea, you let me know when you're ready, and then we can share with folks. Raina, while we're getting set up, is there anything else that you want folks to know as we prepare to get folks ready for November?
So one of the things that I think is really critical is, waiting, like only going to vote is not sufficient. We need to do more than that. And waiting until November to volunteer is too late, because we actually really need everyone on board now. There are things that you can do now, and we'll talk about that as well. Let's see.
I'm ready whenever y'all are.
Great. Andrea, I just gave you co-host.
Actually, I think I'm going to share my screen. What can you? So,
okay. Awesome. Whoever.
Yeah, I'll share mine.
Amazing. All right, we're good to go. I'm turning it over to you, ladies. Let's get us trained.
All right. Let me get the presentation mode. There we go. Can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, perfect. So thank you. You've heard from me a little bit this evening. My name is Raina Walters Morgan, and I'm the Director of Civic Engagement and Voter Protection. And Andrea?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Young. I am the Deputy Director of Civic Engagement and Voter Protection, and I joined the DNC in 2019. And before that, I was the Deputy Voter Protection Director in Georgia for 2018.
We stole her from Georgia, to be clear.
This is why I've been answering all of the Georgia questions in the chat, if anybody's wondering.
So we're going to spend a little bit of time this evening just talking about vote by mail, debunking some myths, and we hope that you will leave with some solid information and ideas on what you can do in your community to help educate about vote by mail. So we'll start by just giving you a little bit of information. COVID-19 has really changed our workflow and things that we had been doing. I tell people we have a pre-COVID workflow and a post-COVID workflow. Pre-COVID, we really focused on building the voter protection infrastructure and building a solid infrastructure for the now presumptive nominee, Joe Biden. In years past, there would be voter protection directors brought on board 3 months before an election and expected to essentially save our democracy. And we wanted to change that. So through funding from the DNC, through funding from other organizations in the voting rights ecosystem like Fair Fight, there are 19 voter protection directors on the ground right now doing work. And also through the DSCC, they are also a great partner. And so we worked on building the pipeline, building the infrastructure, creating new programs. We started a voter protection law school boot camp, and that was to bring in young people into voter protection. We ran a program for the presidential preference primaries. It was the first time we ran a nationally coordinated program for the primaries. We really did our part to try and put something good in place. And we started running the primary programs, and then COVID hit. And it really forced us to reevaluate. As a result of COVID, several states have rescheduled or modified their primary election dates. And when you have those types of changes that have been rapid in nature, it can create chaos and confusion. If you think about the communities that have been most vulnerable to COVID, many of them are communities of color and older communities, senior citizens. And seniors are some of the most reliable and dependent volunteers that we have in the voter protection space in terms of administering elections. You think about the last time you went in to vote and who helped you, chances are someone in there was over the age of 60 or 65. And of course, with social distancing guidelines, voting in person can be difficult if it is not properly planned. Again, some of the challenges that we've seen in terms of the election related challenges, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, polling places were closed without enough notice. Polls opened late in some places. Some people requested their ballots in a timely manner, but did not receive them in time to vote by mail. And I'm sure all of you saw the long lines and the news articles in Wisconsin on April 7th. It was heartbreaking for me as a voter protection director to see what was happening in Wisconsin. What you should know, though, is that despite COVID, despite the challenges that we've seen, we are used to dealing in chaos and crisis. We are used to stepping up to the plate and stepping up to the crisis. This is not the first time that an election has been impacted. September 11th, the anthrax scare. Some of you may remember that there was an anthrax scare at one of the postal facilities in Florida that almost essentially shut down mail in Florida for a period of time. And of course, hurricanes, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Sandy. You know, there are elections that have happened around natural disasters. And so what I want people to leave knowing, one of the many things, is that we're prepared. We are used to dealing with chaos and crises, and our job is to be the problem solvers and to try and figure out how to fix things. This is the other thing I want you to walk away knowing, that November 3rd is happening. It's not going to be canceled, despite the fact that Donald Trump goes out of his way to talk about the election and tries to instill fear. November 3rd is happening. Now, November 3rd might look a little bit different than what we're used to. You may not get your election results that night, but please rest assured that we will have a general election in November. So as I mentioned, you know, we've had to really sort of reevaluate our workflow and think about how voting will look despite COVID. And there are two things, I mentioned this in the last section, but there are two things that we really are pushing for. And that is expanded in-person voting options and vote by mail. Again, it's about options. It's about creating safe options for people to vote. And expanded in-person voting is absolutely one of those things. We want more early voting, expanded days, expanded hours, expanded locations. We want adequate staffing at the polls. We want adequate curbside voting and any other thing that is possible that will essentially expand the base. Voting on weekends, vote anywhere rules, or allow people to vote during non-peak hours and reduce lines. Again, this is about making sure that people can vote in person safely. And we're also pushing for expanded vote by mail options. So vote by mail means different things depending on where you are, right? So it could mean, and I think we might have a slide that talks about this, so I won't get ahead of myself. But some of the things that we're pushing for in terms of expanding vote by mail, especially in light of COVID, includes automatically sending ballots or ballot application forms to all registered voters, not just active voters, providing postage paid envelopes to return ballots, utilizing a postmark deadline instead of a received by deadline, common sense signature matching standards, and community group collection of sealed ballots. I'll take a few minutes to explain some of these. Automatically sending ballots to registered voters. Most states have an active list and an inactive list. Inactive voters may be people who have not voted in a most recent election, or maybe a board of elections sent them a notification or a card and asked them to fill it out and they didn't return it, so they've been placed on inactive. Inactive is usually the step before people get purged. But to be clear, inactive voters are still registered voters. And so in some places, we've seen some secretaries of state or some election officials only wanting to send ballots or ballot applications to registered voters. And what we have found, unfortunately, is that those who tend to be on the inactive list do tend to be younger people, tend to be people who don't have stable housing, tend to be communities of color. So that's why sending to registered voters is important. The postage paid envelope, I mean, you've seen some of these ballots. Can you imagine sending them back? You don't really know how much postage is going to be paid, and what if I don't put enough postage on there? So those postage paid envelopes will ensure that those ballots get back. A postmark deadline instead of a receipt by deadline. There are some states where you must return that ballot by a certain time on election day. And if that ballot is not received, I should say received by a certain time on election day, it will not be counted, regardless of whether you mailed that ballot 2 weeks before. Maybe the post office was slow and they didn't get it there in time. And so utilizing a postmark date ensures that as long as your ballot is postmarked on or before the election day and received by a certain period of time after, it depends on the state. Some states it might be 2 days. Well, Florida is the shortest with 2 days, but some have like 3 days. It might be 5 days. It might be up to 10 days. But postmark on or before and a period of time to allow that ballot to get there helps save votes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Signature matching standards. There are some states that require you to sign your ballot or an envelope that encloses your ballot, and the state might have your signature on file. And so if that signature does not match the signature that is on file, there will be questions. And so when we say common sense signature matching standards, it includes a variety of things, including making sure that there are experts who are evaluating a mismatch in the signature, making sure that you know, there is an opportunity to cure any problems with a signature that might be on file. And then the community group collection of sealed ballots. The Republicans call it ballot harvesting, but it really is allowing groups and organizations to help return sealed ballots, particularly for communities and people who may not be able to do so on their own. And then in terms of what we're pushing for in vote by mail safeguards, the HEROES Act, you might have heard about legislation that passed the House previously. Actually, I'll talk about the CARES Act that already passed. That provided for $100 million in election administration funding. And then the HEROES Act passed the House. It has not yet passed the Senate. And that provides $3.6 billion of funding to help states put election infrastructure in place. It has passed the House. We know that the Senate has not always been as cooperative. And so in your advocacy, we'll talk about that, but we need to make sure that we get this funding because implementing the types of changes that we're pushing for is expensive. Postage alone is expensive. And so that's part of the reason why we are also pushing for these safeguards in terms of passing the House and the Senate. So how does vote by mail work? I kind of talked about this a little bit and caught myself. So each state is different. There are some states that automatically send ballots to voters. There are only 5 states that do that. Colorado is one, Hawaii is one, I believe Washington State is another, but there are not many, only 5. And those are states that are known as vote by mail states where automatically you don't have to request a form, the state will send you the actual ballot in the mail. There are some states that have a permanent absentee list or a permanent vote by mail list. And again, how you get on this list will depend. In several states, you know, you have to affirmatively sign up for this list to get on there. There is no excuse absentee voting. Unfortunately, fortunately, there are some states that will allow you to vote absentee, which is essentially, you know, not voting in person, that will allow you to do that without an excuse. Meaning that, like, for whatever reason, maybe you just don't feel like going to the polls that day. You want to have your ballot, you know, sent to you at home, or maybe you're going to be out of town. No excuse absentee voting is one of those options. And then there are unfortunately some states where you need an excuse in order to vote absentee, to not vote in person. And unfortunately, we tend to see those in some of the New England states. They're more likely to have an excuse required to vote. And states on the West Coast have been more likely to have the automatic vote by mail or permanent absentee or vote by mail list. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
So we will.
Oh. Hey, Andrea. Andrea. Can you all hear Andrea? I think she froze.
Hey, Andrea.
Their polls now.
Andrea, you froze.
Oh,
can you? Yeah, start over.
Okay.
Again. We didn't hear anything you said.
Okay, I may have to turn off video for this. You know, COVID, internet connection, it's a thing. So I was saying we want you all to interact with us a little bit in this next part. I just launched a poll. This first question isn't on the poll itself, but we want you to put in the chat, what are some concerns you've heard about vote by mail, or what are some concerns that you have about vote by mail? Want to hear from you. We're going to go through some common questions, some myths, but please feel free to not only comment on this question, on the concerns, but also to answer all of the remaining poll questions. There should be 7. We want to hear from you all and see what you all think about vote by mail.
And I was going to say, I think I can, because I'm not sure if you can see your screen, Andrea. Do you want me to read them, or are you good to read them?
Nope, I can see them.
Okay,
I have multiple screens set up for that.
Okay.
All good. Okay, I see some questions in Georgia. Postage costs. Postage costs can be an issue. That's why we are advocating for postage to be included, or no postage to be required for vote by mail. All right. 5 and 4 are the same. All right, well, then you probably won't, you're missing a question, but that's okay. We'll work through it. Raina, can you click the next slide? So the first one is, have you ever voted by mail? Split is pretty even. We have about 54% no, 46% yes. That's probably about on par what we've expected. Honestly, until 2018, I had never voted by mail. I always voted in person the first day of early voting in Georgia, but had decided to turn to vote by mail. It was just more convenient. So that was definitely a route that I've taken and have continued to actually do that. So some other concerns we see in the chat, some people I have talked to imply they do not trust that their vote will be counted. That's definitely one that we see. There's another comment about drop boxes and the safety and integrity of those. Those are all common concerns that we see. On the trusting that their vote will not be counted, we see that a lot. People will say, I heard an absentee ballot will only get counted if the race is close. That is just not the case. We want you to know it is a ballot, it's a regular ballot, it'll be counted as long as you've completed it correctly, signed it where it needed to be signed, all of that information is completed. So it looks like the poll is settled on 55% no and 45% yes have voted by mail. Raina, can you click the next question? Yeah. So true or false, vote by mail only helps Democrats. Good news is 97% of you said false, which is the correct answer. So it's interesting because there are widespread attacks by Republicans, by Trump himself, on vote by mail. And the interesting point is that Trump and those in his inner circle have a long history of using vote by mail. Republicans in Florida and Arizona, states with large numbers of retirees who tend to lean Republican, have a long push to expand vote by mail. It is not designed to favor Democrats or Republicans. It is designed to give voters a safe and secure way to vote, not to give any party an advantage over the other. And in fact, we've seen recent studies from Stanford's Democracy and Polarization Lab that found voting by mail didn't give either party an advantage over the other. Raina, next slide, please. True or false, the only way to return a vote by mail ballot is through the mail. 87% said false, 13% said true. So in states, you can return your vote by mail or absentee ballot through the Postal Service, but you can also hand deliver it to a local elected official. And there are also states that have secure drop boxes. So drop boxes aren't in every state, but know that even if you're in a state without drop boxes, you can still return your voted ballot by hand to your local elected official. And the next slide. All right, true or false, voters are more likely to commit fraud with vote by mail. So that is definitely false. All forms of voter fraud are incredibly rare. There is no evidence of widespread voter fraud with vote by mail or absentee voting, and Trump's own voter fraud investigatory committee disbanded without producing evidence of any systemic issues. And as we said, Trump and his inner circle have a long history of voting by mail. So 93% of you said false to that, 7% said true, but we have no indication of widespread voter fraud or that it is more likely to have voter fraud with vote by mail than in-person voting.
And I'll chime in here too. Fraud and voter fraud is incredibly rare. In terms of the statistics, it is a myth. Voter fraud really does not exist in the numbers that Republicans would like to have you believe that it does. And particularly with vote by mail, some of the reasons that we are litigating, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but part of the reason why we're trying to make sure that people don't have their ballots kicked out for reasons that are nonsensical is because that it is a process to vote by mail. You have to be intentional. You have to identify who you are, and there are checks and balances in place to make sure that the people who are filling out those ballots are the people actually returning those ballots. And also, in terms of, the myth of voter fraud, again, Republicans have been using vote by mail. The president has voted by mail. His wife has voted by mail. Many prominent Republicans have voted by mail. And in fact, in certain states, Pennsylvania, I believe, is one, Ohio is another, the Republican Party sent out vote by mail ballot application forms to all Republicans in that state. And so it's really a situation where there is rhetoric on one side that is not matching the actions that same party is taking. I just wanted to sort of throw that out there because it's something that we are dealing with and trying to combat on a daily basis, but also really wanting to share with you that you have to pay attention to the actions and the words, because at least in this case, it's not really matching up. It's fine for Republicans to vote by mail, but all of a sudden it's fraudulent if other people do it. It doesn't make sense.
So there was one question in the chat I did want to address. Did I hear you correctly as saying you can return your absentee ballot to an elected official? Did you mean directly to the Board of Elections by hand? So I mean election officials, as in your county board of elections. So it may not be your state board of elections. It could be your county board of elections, your municipal board of elections. Don't hand it to any random elected official. That is not what we mean by turn it in by hand.
And we want to also stress, like, this differs state by state. As I said in the last section, the reason why voter protection and making sure that people maintain their right to vote is so difficult is because the laws are different in each and every state. And so what we would encourage you to do is to utilize our resources, but also contact us. If you are going to work on educating voters in your state, call us. We can walk you through exactly who and where those people are that you can turn in those ballots to. Again, it's different. In some places, a drop box is in place and that's sufficient. And some, it might be a clerk's office. It might be, you know, another office, a Board of Elections office. So it really does depend on the state, but we can walk you through that.
One other question in the chat I want to address before we move on. If a voter requests a vote by mail ballot but does not receive it, will they be able to vote at the poll on election day? That is another question that is incredibly state specific that you should call our hotline about. In some cases, you can just go to the polls and vote. In other cases, you have to cast a provisional ballot. I don't want to give an answer that is not nuanced. So I would say call our hotline, call your state party's hotline. The answer is we can usually find a way to get you to vote, but I just don't want to give a blanket statement in this particular presentation. All right, I think we're ready for the next poll question. True or false, voters cannot track a vote by mail ballot to see if their local elections office has received it. Once again, this will vary a little bit by state, but in many states, voters can track their ballot online to see when it has arrived, whether it's been accepted or rejected. And then you can also contact your local election official, your county board of election, or your municipal clerk to check your ballot status.
And I'm reading a question and a comment too, just to sort of add in. Katie, hi Katie, how are you? To address Democrats abroad or voters who are abroad, the voters who live abroad, US citizens who live abroad, military voters, for a long time have utilized essentially absentee voting, vote by mail of voting abroad. And so there are resources if you or someone that you are close to is a US citizen but living overseas. Dems Abroad is one, and then Katie shared the resource of www.votefromabroad.org. And also there is also the Federal Voter Assistance website. We can drop the link in the chat box.
And just know we work very closely with Dems Abroad. They actually have their own, it's not a hotline, it's a chat feature where they answer questions. But if anything comes up where they need to be in touch with a specific state election official, that is something that we're able to work with them on. So definitely have not forgotten our voters abroad. All right, I think we're ready for the final poll question here.
Oh, the next one, number 7, did we do this one? Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right. So if poll 7, true or false, if my vote by mail ballot is challenged, I cannot fix it. So 81% said false, 19% said true. Once again, as anything in this presentation, it depends on the state, but in many states, you will be contacted if your ballot is missing a signature, if there's a signature mismatch, and then, as always, call our hotline and we can let you know what is the process to cure or fix it. But in many cases, if your ballot has an issue or it's challenged, you'll be notified and we can find a way to resolve that. All right. So I think we've hit this plenty of times, but just in case, if you have questions about voting, this is the DNC's voter assistance hotline. You can call us or text us. There are also many state voter protection teams that have state-specific voter protection hotlines, but we will support voters across the country. So feel free to share our number. We're happy to answer questions, and not just on election day. We run year-round. It doesn't just have to be a problem voting. We don't want you to wait until you get to election day and something goes wrong. If you have a question, if you just don't know where to go to vote, that's what this number is for. feel free to call us anytime. All right. And some of this Raina has got into a little bit already. Some of the things that we were doing pre-COVID and continue to do. There are 19 voter protection directors on the ground now. It's been really important to build the infrastructure early. We want to make sure that we're running programs, that we are catching issues early, identifying things in March, April, May, June, so that we're prepared for them in November. As I said, we've set up our own hotline, but state parties set up their hotlines as well. We're collecting data to see what are the issues, where are they, how do we work on resolving those now? We're recruiting volunteers, we're activating those networks now. We're getting people to sign up as interested in being poll workers or poll observers. We, in the midst of COVID, had to transition some of our volunteer work into remote work. So our hotline right now is completely remote. It's been operating just fine, but we were doing it in person and then switched to remote in the midst of COVID and the need to social distance. And then finally, we provide training and strategic guidance to our state party partners and work with them on providing training to their own poll observers and hotline volunteers. One of the things that we have done in the midst of COVID is tracking election day schedules. As you all know, many election days have changed, but it's not just the election dates themselves, it's the voter registration dates, it's the early voting dates, it's the absentee deadlines to request a ballot, to actually send in your ballot. All of that we're tracking, as well as legislative changes. We've hit this, we're going to continue to hit it. It is more important than ever for us to recruit poll workers, particularly younger poll workers. We want to make sure that we are fully staffed and have enough people working the polls on election day so we don't have extremely long lines. We are also working to provide voter information and engaging volunteers. We do all sorts of monthly campaigns. We have a voter protection newsletter. We have a voter protection Facebook group. And we just continue to provide information to our voters so that they have all the tools that they need to exercise their right to vote. And then we go to court when necessary and we litigate when necessary. And I think Raina is going to get a little bit more into that in the next slide.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our litigation wins. The DNC has been very active in litigation, building the infrastructure and also making sure that we can expand the rights of voters. And we try to do that through advocacy, through education, through organizing, but sometimes we don't have a choice but to litigate. Wisconsin is a place that we needed to go and litigate. You remember the lines, you probably read or heard about some of the difficulties voting there. We realized, we work with the state parties very closely and realized that because of COVID and because Wisconsin is a state that does tend to have same-day voter registration, that with limited in-person voting, people would be limited in being able to register and vote in person on election day, especially with the reduction of polling locations. And so we sued to extend the voter registration deadline. We won on that. And also remember earlier I talked about utilizing a postmark date instead of a receive by date. In Wisconsin, there was a receive by date in place. Ballots need to be received by 8 p.m. on election day. And we sued on that. As a result, we did win on that. That case went through the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. It went to the United States Supreme Court. We didn't win on everything that we litigated on. But what the Supreme Court did do was say that utilizing a postmark date was acceptable for this primary. And so because we were able to utilize a postmark date instead of the receive by date, almost 100,000 additional ballots were counted as a result. Those are 100,000 additional votes that would not have been counted. And that's why we do this work. You know, I get really happy when we are helping one person, but 100,000, almost 100,000 is a huge number. And just know that Democrats lost, Hillary Clinton specifically, lost Wisconsin by less than 100,000 votes. So it makes a difference. And in Nevada, we also filed another lawsuit. That one was a little bit different. In Nevada, the Secretary of State wanted to mail all mail ballots to only active voters, not all registered voters. They were going to reduce the polling locations in all of their counties, and of course, because we were also challenging the signature matching provisions and other provisions, we sued. So the Clark County in Nevada has 74% of the population. And the registrar in Clark County, after our lawsuit, decided that they wanted to work with us cheaper than going through the rest of the motions of the litigation. So they indicated that they would send ballots to all registered voters. I'm sorry, the Secretary of State did that as well. Sent ballots to all registered voters, not just active voters. They established 2 additional polling locations in Clark County and set up supervision of signature matching review and a process for voters to cure, to notify and cure any signature match issues. And they agreed to deputize in Clark County 20 individuals who could travel and receive voted and sealed ballots from voters. And again, 74% of the state's population lives in Clark County. We also got another win recently, like just over the holiday weekend in South Carolina. They have eliminated the witness requirement for the primary. In several states, South Carolina is not the only one, if you're gonna vote by mail or vote absentee, a witness is required to not see who you voted for, but to observe the process of you voting. If you live alone, if you are high risk and are concerned about maintaining a distance and safety for voting, that witness requirement can be difficult. And so in South Carolina, we sued on that in addition to some other things. And in South Carolina, they have indicated that they will not enforce the witness requirement for the primary election. I also wanted to highlight some wins in the voting rights ecosystem. We work with a lot of great organizations in the progressive space that are also committed to making sure that every eligible voter can cast a ballot and have that ballot counted. Here are some wins that we've seen. Democratic leadership makes a difference. In California, Governor Newsom ordered ballots to be mailed to all 20.6 million voters in California for the November election. California was the first state to make their plans known for November. A lot of the litigation that we've had have directly been related to the primaries, but California said for the general election, they want to go ahead and do that. Of course, that is in court. There was a lawsuit filed, but it was bold leadership by the governor of California to do that. And of course, it's something that we support. In Virginia, there was another lawsuit. And in that lawsuit, it was determined that the witness requirement also would not be enforced there due to COVID concerns. And in Michigan, you may have seen the president's tweet about this, but in Michigan, the Secretary of State determined that she was going to send absentee ballot request forms to all registered voters. Again, it's about expanding access and making the process a little easier than it already is.
All right, so we wanted to go through some of the action items and the takeaways that you all should take with you going forward. So over the next few slides, we'll share ways you can help your communities become engaged, register, vote, and protect their vote in state primaries and the general election. I should say the remaining presidential primaries, state primaries, and the general election. All right. So every single time we have a voter protection event, training, whatever, the first thing we will say and the last thing we will say is check your registration and check it often. Even if you think you're registered, we just want to double check. If you've moved, you will have to update your registration. There are some cases where, as Raina said, maybe a piece of mail got bounced back and you've been placed on the inactive list. We just want to make sure there are no problems. And we want you to check it early enough out that if your state has a voter registration deadline that is 30 days before the election, there is a chance and there's time to deal with it. So check your registration status often. You can do that by going to iwillvote.com. And on iwillvote.com, there's an ability to select your state, check your registration status. If you have any issues using the tool, our hotline number shows up and we can walk you through that process as well.
And also tell your friends to check their registration too.
Yes, please.
There are so many times when people are like, oh, I'm registered already, only to show up to go vote and realize that they are not. Voter purges are real. Yes. It is an attempt to get people off the rolls. I mean, some list maintenance is normal, but sometimes it goes beyond that. And so especially for this election, even if you think you are registered already, check your registration status.
And I think one thing people don't realize with voter registration is they think I registered to vote, I voted for Obama in 2008, I'm good. That is not necessarily how voter registration works. And you could go on inactive status, and once you're on inactive status, there's a potential to be purged. So it is not enough to have voted at one point in time, 10 years ago. It's important that you are checking your registration to make sure it's ready to go now. One of the worst calls that we get on our hotline is from someone who says, I didn't register to vote. When was the deadline? And the deadline was 30 days ago. And at that point, we can't get them registered to vote because the deadline is passed. So check it early, check it often, make sure your registration is up to date. Tell your friends the same thing.
And also know if you're in a state where there is early voting or there is same day registration. But that should not be your fallback, right? To the extent that you're able, you should register ahead of time. But also know that in some places, you might have additional registration options.
So one thing we want you to do, and this is state specific, so we can't give you advice on your state in this presentation, but we can provide the resources. Voter protection directors in your state can provide the resources on general education on mail-in voting. One thing many of our voter protection directors are doing on the ground already is creating resources to tell people how to vote by mail, how to request their vote by mail ballot. Pennsylvania has some great resources. Georgia has some great resources. And we just need to make sure that we're sharing that information so we are uncomplicating the process for people who have never done it before. We want you to update your communities on election-related changes. Some of these election dates are changing. Some states, some counties are reducing the number of in-person voting locations. And it's just really important to share updated information. We know it changes all the time. We are also tracking all of this information as it changes, but it's really important to get people the most up-to-date information.
Especially as we deal with COVID, we do expect that there are going to be some updates in terms of how we're voting. We'd like to see more states like California send ballots to everybody, but people need to know that that ballot's going to come in the mail if that's something that's happening. And also I would chime in, especially for the seat at the table ambassadors, or if you're not involved with seat at the table, we encourage you to get involved with seat at the table. But this is also about educating our communities, making sure that, even if there is a training, or education happening at a state voter protection level or the state party or an organization, we really need people in their communities who are going to take the lead and going to step up to the plate to provide that education and information, because the fact is that we can't do it alone. We can't do it for everyone, and one organization is not going to reach everyone. And so, to the extent that you can take up that banner and to the extent that you can be the educator in your community, we're really going to need that.
And we want you to contact your state legislators. One thing Wakenya shared, I believe, with you all was a document created by Perkins Coie on the status of vote by mail policy in each state. So does your state have a postmark deadline to return an absentee ballot or a receive by deadline? Does your state have prepaid postage? Things like that. And if the answer is no, if they're not providing postage, if the deadline is received by instead of postmark deadline, those are opportunities for us to reach out to our legislators and to advocate for those changes. So we want to just push for vote by mail safeguards for those things that are not already in place. And so we know, as Raina mentioned, $400 million already allotted through the CARES Act is not enough. We will need additional funding to make sure that we adequately safeguard our elections this year.
And also the HEROES Act too, it's passed, was it introduced in the House? Has it passed the House?
It's passed the House and it is up for discussion in the Senate on June 1st.
Mm-hmm. And so contact your senators. It's really important that we do that. And also I want to put in a note here about drop boxes. There have been questions in the chat. I think I saw some about some drop boxes. Some of that is the answer in terms of how you can get more drop boxes will depend on the state and, you know, sort of what the laws are. But some of that is advocacy. Some of that is, you know, making sure that election officials know where those drop boxes need to be in the places and instances where there is that flexibility to do that. You know, I was on a call earlier today and someone, it was in Colorado, the Secretary of State essentially said one of the things that she's pushing for is to make sure that there are drop boxes or in-person voting options at every college campus. That will make a difference in terms of making sure that young people are able to vote. And so really understanding what the issues are and what we need to advocate for are also things that we can help walk you through as well. And so additional action items, you know, help your community vote by mail, help them understand vote by mail. There are several states that require an absentee ballot request form. And I know for some of the states that had primaries around COVID, Ohio is one. The voter protection director was working with churches to include absentee ballot request forms in lunches that they were giving away. She was getting them to put links, you know, on websites. She was working with grocery stores to make absentee ballot applications accessible. You know, she was working with a variety of like unions and different organizations. Really understanding what the vote by mail process is in your state, and if it's a ballot application that needs to be filled out, and you're not in a state like California or Michigan who've already said that they're, or one of the other 5 permanent vote by mail states that have not already indicated that they are going to send ballots or applications, step in and help do that, because to the extent that we can get more people understanding that requesting an application is something that they can do, it will be helpful. And in a state where this is possible, you can host an absentee ballot application party, you know, get your friends together and walk through with each other how to fill out the absentee ballot request form. If it's permissible in your state, host a notary or a witness party. So as I mentioned, some states do require a witness. Some states do have limits on the number of ballots a person can witness. And so again, contact us. We can work with you to give you a sense of what that number might look like. There are some other states that require that you can use a witness or a notary. Who do you know that's a notary that might be willing to help get those ballots completed, the ballot envelopes completed or fulfilled that requirement? Being creative about how we are working within our communities and bringing our communities together to make sure that people understand the process, who can explain the process and make sure that we're doing it right is going to be critical for vote by mail in November. And we've talked about this, but volunteering, again, waiting until election day to volunteer is too late. We need more people doing things earlier. So you can volunteer in a variety of ways. Two that I'm going to talk about. One is to become a poll worker. Again, people who are administering the election who can help us, critical. It's really important, and especially people who are COVID resistant or who are not people who are high risk. Again, some of the people that we've had doing this have been over the age of 65, and they are one of the most vulnerable groups. And so it's really important to get young folks involved and more people involved. And you can be an election advocate by monitoring local election activity. What people don't always understand is that the decisions that impact elections are happening now. In many states, the decisions on making those early vote plans, deciding where early vote locations are going to be, finalizing precincts, finalizing vote machines and resources and supplies. Those decisions don't get made in October. They get made earlier. And in states where you're able to monitor that election activity and keep those people accountable, it is important that we do that. We want to make sure that there are polling locations near public transportation. We want to make sure that there are polling locations in communities that need to have access. And it can't just be, again, one organization. It has to be all of us working together to do that. And so this is about the end. We want to make sure that you all have access to some of our resources. Prior to this, you all received the Safeguarding Our Democracy with Vote by Mail. This is a document that will walk through state by state what the status is. Now, I think it's dated April 20th, so know that some of those things may have changed for the primary. That document goes through what the law says in that state. And so it'll give you a good sense of like what the barriers are in your state for vote by mail. And also the Debunking Myths document, Debunking Myths About Vote by Mail. We covered some of the things in that document in the polls that we went through today. But there are other issues that we didn't get a chance to cover that are also covered in there. And of course, talking points. If you want to do some op-eds, if you want to have information to talk to your community about vote by mail, that is a document. It's very detailed, but it's a document that can help you do that. And last thing that I'll say is we have a Facebook group. If you're interested in voter protection, please join our Facebook group. It's facebook.com/groups/DNCVotePro. And again, you can always reach out to us via email, votepro@dnc.org. You can call us 833-DEMVOTE or text question to 43367.
Raina and Andrea, thank you all so much. Folks, I know we can't hear you clapping, but please give these ladies a round of applause. This was excellent. This was excellent information. In fact, you had more questions coming in about how people can be poll workers and what they need to do, and if they can be poll workers outside of where they live and in other districts and other targeted precincts. So we definitely probably should think about pulling together another training on how to become a poll worker and what that process is like, because there were tons of questions as it relates to that. And for everyone who submitted a question, we're gonna work with voter protection to figure out how we can best answer and give you answer the questions that you submitted. Some of them were super state specific. I'm gonna try to convince these ladies to do office hours by tri-state area so you can get some of your more direct questions answered. I know this was a wealth of information. We enjoyed every bit of tonight. For folks who are watching, if you enjoyed what you saw tonight, if you want more of this type of activity and planning from the DNC, let us know. We're here for you. We are organizing seat at the table events all year long. We are serious about activating Black women in this, and others, let me be clear, and others in this process. But we know that I can always lean on my sisters and we can get it done. So I am so grateful again to everyone from Secretary Way. She did such an amazing job. I was so proud to have her on the call. Our dynamic DNC caucus chairs, Ms. Virgie Rollins, who is our Black caucus chair, and Ms. Lottie Shackelford, who is our women's caucus chair. Who I think, if I'm not mistaken, our assistant treasurer actually joined us earlier tonight, and I didn't get to her in my opening remarks, but I wanted to say thank you to Lorna Johnson as well. She's one of the other women in leadership at the DNC, and so I always want to make sure that I am highlighting our Black women who are serving in leadership positions within our party, as well as our civic engagement and voter protection vice chair, state senator from Louisiana, Karen Carter Peterson, who could not be here with us tonight, but she is a vital force and a vital voice in the fight for voter protection. And so we always want to make sure that we're lifting up her and the work that she's doing to empower Raina and Andrea to do the amazing work that they're doing across the country. I could not do this without the support of my dream team. Those are the dream girls who make sure that my work gets done well. I want to say a special thank you to Miss Ebony Baylor, who is the DNC African American political director, Miss Milan Robinson, who is the special assistant to DNC State Party and Leadership Affairs, and of course the incomparable Atoya Deans, who's all things to everybody. So I appreciate her so much for joining us on tonight's call. Again, for all of you all who tuned in, just know this: our work is not done. You know, if anything that this pandemic has presented to us is an opportunity to organize everywhere and everyone that we can. We're going to be doing some real strategic, localized organizing coming really soon to you. And if you're interested in being and serving in your state and figuring out how you can plug into some of the programming that we're building here at the DNC, make sure you send me an email to seat@dnc.org. We want you, we need you to be involved in these processes. For those of you who are not strongly functional on email, you can also text us to seat@43367. That's another way that you can plug into the work that we're doing here at the DNC. And for those of you who love Facebook and who are on it all the time anyway, make sure you join our Facebook group, that's Seat at the Table Ambassadors on Facebook. It is a Facebook group primarily for Black women. Full transparency, no disclaimers. We know. We just want everyone to know you are welcome, but it is for Black women, and we want to be intentional about that. So if you have any other questions, again, make sure you send us an email to seat@dnc.org. You'll start seeing some additional trainings coming on. Voter protection is just one of many spaces that we want to work very closely with these ladies on, but we also have some things coming around how to bundle, meaning how to raise money for elections and for candidates who you believe in. And so we're going to be doing some of that training coming to you very, very soon. So please stay tuned for that. And for those of you who thought we were up to nothing, we are up to a whole lot. So I just want you to know that the DNC is here to get it done, and we're here to get it done for you. So thank you so much again for joining us tonight, and we will see you all soon. Don't forget, check your voter registration, iwillvote.com, if you haven't done so already. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.